Do you have an idea for a podcast but don't know where to start? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor is such an easy way to record and edit a podcast, and you can do it from either your phone or computer. Best part is you don't have to worry about getting it out there. Anchor distributes to many platforms, so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and many more. You can start making money right away without having a minimum number of listeners, too. Anchor really is everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place.
Hi, welcome to the Pier 54 podcast.
I'm Amanda Kimmel.
And I'm Shannon Coach, and we are your hosts.
Hi, and welcome to the April 18th episode where we do a little bit of information from General Hospital's history. As we mentioned on Monday, today we are going to talk about the Hardy family, which is a family that's been around since episode 1. So, Amanda, you excited to get started talking about the Hardys?
I am excited. You're going to educate me because I know they've been around forever, but I don't know the beginning story.
Yep. So we're actually going to take turns when we do like our history lessons and everything of who does the first half of the family history. That way we're not both stuck in the same decades, I guess. So for basically what I started off, I used abcdaytime.fandom.com. It's a wiki page about the Hardy family. generalhospitalfandom.com, generalhospital.fandom.com, revolve.com, history of General Hospital, soapcentral.com, and the fullwiki.org about Steve and Audrey Hardy. They each have their own page. But those are the things that I referenced for this. Sorry, no YouTube this week. No, nothing I didn't look anything up anyway. Oh, I did look up a little bit on just regular old Wikipedia, though, too. So for anyone who has been watching General Hospital, I think for more than a week, they've heard the name Hardy, even though, as you'll get into, there is no one on the show currently with that last name.
Right.
But they've been around since day one, and Dr. Steve Hardy basically is kind of like the patriarch of the whole show. And he really is, because if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have many of the characters that we have now. Dr. Steve Hardy had a total of 4,300 episodes. But I'm not sure if this is including when Jason Thompson played him in the flashback in the 52nd anniversary episode, because that was just a couple years ago. But he was on the show from April 1961 until April 1996, which was only a month before the passing of the actor John Berardino. And fun fact that I did not know before I did this. So we're going to get a little bit off of Steve Hardy and a little bit into Mr. Berardino. So he did act a little bit as a child, but as an adult, did you know that he was a Major League Baseball star?
No.
Yep. He was a Major League Baseball player before he became an actor professionally. He played primarily second base and shortstop, but he also played first and third. He played for the St. Louis Browns, the Cleveland Indians, and guess who?
Who?
The Pittsburgh Pirates.
I know that's what you're going to say.
I know! Because we're from Pittsburgh. Although they are not my favorite team. The Boston Red Sox are. Go Sox. And he actually won a World Series when he was with the Cleveland Indians.
Oh my! I had no idea.
I know! In 1948. And he retired from baseball in 1952 because he suffered a knee injury and was released from the Pittsburgh Pirates. Because the Pirates let them all go.
Yes.
So
we're not going to get into Pittsburgh sports.
He may have started that trend too, but he is actually the only person to have won both a World Series and he has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
That is crazy.
And I really felt like that was just kind of
that's awesome.
Really awesome information that I had to share. So, but now we'll go back to Mr. Steve Hardy. So we never actually meet his parents, but he was born in China and his parents were American missionaries. So kind of like really instilled that act of service and like a life of service to others. When we meet him in 1963, he was the chief of internal medicine on the 7th floor, as we knew from our episode 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Poor Charles was not given a name until the 70s. So at this time, General Hospital was just the 7th floor. And he was so devoted to his work and his patients that it cost him his first engagement to his fiancée at the time, Peggy Mercer. His first patient was a car accident survivor named Angie, who wound up having wounds so bad that they had to bandage her entire face. And I think we both said that we had watched the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
And so they removed the bandages and she got like really mad at her reflection and everything.
Yes.
And I guess the further the storyline went along, she was contemplating suicide, and Dr. Hardy and his friend and fellow and his also a nurse at the hospital, Jessie Brewer, talked her out of it, which I just think is interesting because in 1963, and I don't know if it's just because the suicide rate is so high now, even just in our lifetime, I mean, it went from you didn't hear a lot about suicide to now you hear about it all the time.
Right.
That we automatically assume in the early 60s, they probably didn't have, at least like that's where my thinking goes. I mean, I know that people killed themselves in the 60s.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
But for it to be a
storyline on a daytime soap, I mean, wasn't this the time when, wasn't it Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore? Weren't they the first couple to ever be seen in a bed together?
Right.
Like Lucy and Ricky were in separate beds. So I feel like this was a really bold leap for them to talk about suicide. And then eventually, I guess Angie winds up having a baby and like all this stuff. But I didn't go down that rabbit hole. It just like, she stayed in and Dr. Hardy continued to help her out. In 1964, so his first fiance left him because he was, a workaholic. And in 1964, a former nurse, current flight attendant, was in town visiting her sister, Audrey March. Oh. And so Audrey had decided to get back into nursing and took a job as a private nurse. She and Steve fell in love, but just like Peggy, she realized that Steve loved his work a little too much. And so she broke off their engagement. And all I could find was around the same time she accepted a proposal from a patient named Randy. So I'm not sure if she was cheating on Steve because I feel like that's a really quick turnaround.
Yeah.
But then Randy deserts Audrey when she becomes diagnosed with lymphoma. And Steve's by her side through the whole treatment, and they get back together and get married in 1965. So the one thing that I'm just going to spoiler alert on is Steve has only been married to Audrey. Audrey has not only been married to Steve, which I also think is really interesting because as we discussed last week with Scotty, it's and stereotypically in most soap operas, I mean, it's the guy that winds up having multiple marriages and things like, I mean, I know Carly's been married to a couple of different guys, but historically it's always been the guy gets the multiple women. Audrey has quite the list of husbands, although we did joke about Laura's full name. True. And what that could be. So perhaps she started the whole. So they got married in 1965 and they tried to have some children, but Audrey, and it doesn't say why she thought this, but she thinks that Steve is sterile. Oh, okay. So she goes and gets artificially inseminated and gets pregnant, which I also think for being 1965 had to have been ahead of its time because I mean it's still so not as common now, you know. All right, so after they're married, so they did want to have kids, so it's not like she was just wanting to have a child. However, Steve does not know how she became pregnant, so she feels guilty about it and she tells him the truth about how she became pregnant. And men, let's stop fighting when we're behind the wheel. Let's just wait until we're parked, maybe out of the car. Because, I mean, let's all face it, the car does provide some really good soundproofing for us. So it is not a bad place to have an argument, just perhaps not while driving. Because as she's telling him how she got pregnant, his emotions get the most of him causes him to get into a car accident, which results in a miscarriage. And this devastated Audrey so much that she separated from Steve and goes to Vietnam to help with war orphans. But then she returns to town in 1969 and she continues to push Steve away. They actually divorced, so they hadn't divorced yet, and she marries Tom Baldwin, as we talked about last week. Okay. And as you mentioned last week, that Tom actually raped Audrey. Did you know why? I don't think we talked about why. No. It was because she wouldn't consummate the marriage because she was still in love with Steve, that she wouldn't sleep with her husband. Okay. So she decides to divorce Tom and leave town. In 1976, Steve had been promoted to chief of staff. At the same time, a young woman named Terry Weber Arnett came to town after her parents had died, along with her two brothers, Rick and Jeff. Mm-hmm. And both of those guys wanted to be doctors. So Jeff winds up graduating from med school with his wife, Monica Bard. I couldn't get too much information about this. So they were picked by Steve to do the Mr. and Mrs. Intern experimental program. Okay. No information on this whatsoever could I find. I don't know what this means.
Okay.
I want to know so badly. So, if you were watching General Hospital in 1976 when Steve Hardy was doing this experimental program, the Mr. and Mrs. experimental program with Jeff and Monica Weber, please email us and fill us in. I would love to know. Our email address is peer54podcast@gmail.com, and it's peer54podcast, not spelled out. So, yeah.
I can't wait to find out what that is.
And so the only thing that I can assume is it's because they're new doctors.
Right, like a mentoring program.
And they're married.
Mhm.
So maybe seeing, oh, can we get a successful married couple to become a successful surgical team?
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I hope someone tells us.
I know. I want to know so bad. I wish my Grammy was alive so maybe I could get some answers on this one. So I guess the program had problems, and so Steve ended it, and then Monica and Jeff divorced soon after. So it could not have been a good thing, I'm thinking. I don't know. Maybe he had them pitting after each other, like fighting for some. But then that's dumb.
Right. Why would
you don't
take
pit
a
husband
married
and wife?
couple?
Yeah. Marriage is hard enough. You don't need to give them another reason to argue.
Right. They're together at home all day long, then they're in the hospital all day
Yeah.
long, and now they're fighting for the same positions or study groups. That's weird.
I don't know. So, this is all us speculating what the heck it is. After the divorce, Jeff was in bad shape, and at some point he shoots himself and is rushed to the hospital for surgery. While he's there, it looks like it's not going to go well, so Terry tells Steve about a letter that her mother had revealed to her on her deathbed. Steve is Jeff's father.
Mm.
So apparently, before General Hospital started, a long time ago, Helene is the name of Terry, Jeff, and Rick's mom. She and Steve had been together, and Steve never knew about Jeff. I did read somewhere that, and I don't have it written down, I guess Steve so Helene's husband's name is Lars, which we will recognize this name later.
Right.
And Steve and Lars were...
Now you sound like Heather.
I know.
Go ahead.
Stephen and Lars, no, because she calls him Stephen Lars.
Yeah.
They were like best friends. So this is like the pre-General Hospital scandal because,
oh, yeah.
He slept with his best friend's wife.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they were together at the time. Like, we don't have that.
Right.
Okay. So then around after that, so that was 1976. Okay. So Audrey returns. Remember, she left town pregnant. Oh, I didn't mention that when Tom raped her, she got pregnant, which we talked about last week.
Yes.
But I forgot to re-mention that this week. So Audrey returns. She tells everybody that the baby was stillborn, but she had actually left it with a nanny named Peggy Nelson. Well, Peggy decides to blackmail Audrey.
Of course she does.
Because we do that. And she decides, after Audrey decides to get back together with Steve, and she had asked him to adopt the baby, who she had named Steve.
Mm.
Somehow, Peggy winds up murdered.
Oh.
Audrey is charged, but with help from Steve. And it doesn't say, but I'm guessing Lee Baldwin.
Right.
She's acquitted, and she and Steve remarry in 1977. However,
they have a sordid past.
Yes. Tom Baldwin comes back, and he reclaims baby Steve, and he renames the baby Tommy, and he kidnaps him, taking him to Mexico. Tom Baldwin dies, and Tommy is returned to Audrey. During the kidnapping, Tommy, baby, developed a heart condition, which he had to have surgery on when he came back to town. And Revolvi says, oh, I messed up something here. So at some point, she and Steve weren't together again. But, oh, I said that too early. Sorry. So, oops. I copy and pasted some stuff here. So Revolvi says that Audrey feels gratitude towards Jim, who is the surgeon that performs the surgery on
the
baby Tommy, and marries him.
Mm.
After he acquires a hand injury and fears he cannot operate again. So my daughter once stuck a plastic bead in her ear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so we had to go to an ENT specialist, and he removed it pretty quickly. I was extremely grateful to him.
Did you marry him?
No.
I feel like you owe him some sort of payment.
I'm like, should I have sent him a
gift basket?
Was a gift basket not appropriate to send to a doctor? I forgot to take off my wedding ring and marry him, So anyway, so this guy, Jim. So then eventually Jim leaves Audrey for a younger woman, and Audrey contemplates suicide. And guess who saves her?
Oh, is it?
Steve!
How'd I know?
Who at some point during all of this husband hopping, Steve had actually taken a short trip over to One Life to Live.
Oh.
To do a couple crossover episodes for a couple
Oh,
weeks.
I love that they did that even back
I
then.
know. Back in the 70s.
Wow.
He was over there. So this is where Steve proposes to Audrey and they wind up remarrying. Except for it turns out that Tom wasn't dead and he comes back. And that makes the Steve and Audrey marriage invalid. But then it would also have made the Jim and Audrey, but regardless, because they're already divorced anyway. This is what I was talking about. Like, Audrey's like, I didn't realize this.
I knew that
Audrey's like Elizabeth.
Oh.
Elizabeth's like Audrey.
Yeah. No, I knew that she was like, the hot young nurse, but I didn't realize.
She had so many husbands. I thought that they were the one and done and so happy.
No, I knew it was a little more sordid than that, but I didn't realize, out of gratitude that we married people.
Out of gratitude, we married
thought
them.
There was a little more behind it.
Yeah, like love. Love's a good thing to have in a marriage.
Necessary? I don't know.
Liking the person is also a good thing to have in marriage. But so it turns out that Tom wasn't dead. So then Tom tries to reclaim Tommy, but he eventually gives up because you just do that.
I guess
you just say, you know what, forget it. So then Steve and Audrey remarry in 1977, and he formally adopts Tommy, who is now called Tom Hardy. So I guess the kid had grown accustomed to being called Tom. So, he wasn't going to change his name back to Steve. So 1979, Steve came down with Lassa fever, which I don't know what that is, so I looked, and let's see. According to Medical News Today, Lassa fever is loading. Okay, so Lassa fever is an acute viral disease carried by a type of rat that is common in West Africa, and it can be life-threatening.
Oh, no.
So we don't know how Steve got this, but he did, and he got really sick. And so, as it happens, people do the deathbed confession thing, and they hadn't told Jeff yet that Steve was his dad. And so they decided to tell Jeff before Steve passed away. Actually, Audrey told him. Jeff was hurt and cold to Steve after his recovery, but eventually they bonded. And then for some reason, like, we have huge gaps. It's like everything was going so quick. And then it's like, oh, we're just going to jump ahead 2 years. Jeff and Steve finally get a relationship, and Steve and Audrey find out that they have a grandson, Stephen Lars Weber.
Okay.
Who is from Jeff's affair with Heather Weber. Not affair, marriage. He had a marriage to her.
So was Heather Weber not crazy then?
I think she's always been a little weird, but I don't think she was our Heather Weber.
Okay.
All right, so basically Jeff had Stephen Lars with Heather Grant. And it says like they came back in 1981, or they left. In 1981, the truth came out and Jeff left town that year with Steve and Audrey's first grandchild, Stephen Lars Weber. Jeff and Stephen Lars had just been reunited as Stephen Lars' mother, Heather, had sold him away to Peter and Diana Maynard Taylor 3 years earlier as a newborn. And then Tom Hardy went to medical school. That was in 1984. And then he came back in 1987 as a doctor. I did not know you could become a doctor in 3 years. I feel like that's a really quick turnaround, even if both of your parents are in the medical field.
We should find what college that is and go to it ourselves.
I don't know. Maybe they paid to have him sent through. And Tom started seeing a Black doctor, Simone Ravel. I forget how to pronounce her last name. Ravel. I want to say Simone Ravel.
Okay.
And it was a little controversial.
Yes.
That happened. And that's kind of where we leave the 80s. So I will turn it over to you to take us through the 90s through today.
Alrighty. 93 is whenever Steve was celebrating his 30th anniversary at the hospital. So Audrey had planned a party for him to celebrate that. And Ryan came and attacked her because he mistook her for his mother.
Ryan Chamberlain?
Ryan Chamberlain. So I'm glad that they referenced that we went back to that point because I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
The Ryan attacks and I knew
No.
it centered a lot around Felicia and those kind of things like we've talked about
Right.
in the episode recaps. But bringing it to Port Charles, he attacked Audrey. And I would think it was a conflict of interest, but Steve performed the surgery that took care of her wounds.
I would agree with that. Maybe there's...
I don't know if there's more to that story.
There
He
has
was the
to
only
be.
one that could perform the surgery. I don't know. I didn't see that information, but I just think it's funny the way that they just let that happen. Like, sure, operate on your wife. It's fine. I
Oh my
mean,
gosh.
no problem. Like, how would you do that without
I don't know.
being terrified? But obviously, it was a successful operation, and she healed quickly, and everything was wonderful. Then it goes on to 1996 is whenever Steve passed away. The information that I found talked about Tom leaving for Africa again.
Okay.
And I was confused as to why he would leave, just kind of be over it. So,
Wait, when did he go to Africa?
In 96. Well, one website said 96, one said 97. But
So
that
after
time period.
that Lassa fever, though.
Right.
That would have made sense. Okay.
Right. No, exactly.
Africa came in the 90s instead of the 80s.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't understand.
All right.
Their fever.
I was wondering if I got
early.
my timeline
No.
wrong, but
but it
not possible.
explains it, which I was happy about because I loved when the Ward family was around.
Yes.
And so generalhospital.fandom.com explains that Tom went to Africa to treat refugees there. And the reason why was because Simone had hooked up with Justice. And so he had wanted to be back with Simone.
Yes.
But Simone was over it. And so after some arguing, he went ahead and gave Simone her divorce. And then he moved on and dated Felicia for a little while, which I didn't remember.
Justice dated Felicia?
No, not Justice. Tom.
Oh, no, I totally remembered that. They were on the opening credits together.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They were together in the opening credits.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, anyway, that apparently didn't work out because he ultimately returned to Africa and he has been there since then. And then shortly after that, Simone took Tommy and left town anyway.
Okay.
Her and Justice had broken up then.
Aww.
And moved on. And I would have liked them to stay forever because I love the Ward family, but we'll get into that later. 1997 is whenever Jeff sent Sarah and Elizabeth to live with Audrey because he was doing work with the poor and couldn't take them with him. So he sent them to live with Audrey, which it felt to me like that was earlier in the 90s, like as I was reading it.
Yeah.
But it says 97. And then it went on to explain how Sarah is a doctor living in California. And they told us, not recently, but in more recent years, that she's a pediatric cardiologist.
So why isn't it Wiley has a heart thing?
I was wondering.
Okay.
I was wondering that same.
Sorry, I just said that like so slowly, but I'm like,
Yes, when I read that information, I was like, there's a baby on the show that has a heart problem. Why do we not have a heart
Elizabeth never said, oh my gosh, my sister could help.
Yeah.
All right.
So, but maybe they're leaving that open because we keep saying we want Sarah back. Maybe that can be Sarah's opening. Maybe that'll be how we find out who Wiley's real dad is and all of that. I still don't understand why they didn't make that connection to begin with, that Michael had that same issue. But again, that's the Quartermain storyline we'll get to eventually. Yeah. But as I was reading the information, it kind of all was coming back to me and I was seeing these same storylines in my head. In 2004 is whenever Stephen Lars returned to Port Charles, and in 2010 he was chief of staff. He was dating Olivia then, which you reminded me of, because I could picture Stephen Lars being there, and I knew he was an important part of all of the hospital comings and goings, and was so good with Elizabeth and everything, but I could not picture who he was with, and he was with Olivia then.
I really liked him.
I liked him too. He was so nice.
Yeah.
He was such a nice guy. But that was his downfall because he was so nice. He had assisted one of his patients in Memphis with suicide, and he is now in jail for that assisted suicide. Hopefully he gets out soon. I don't know. That makes me sad that he was sent away for that because I really liked that character. I did not remember, as I was reading through, in 2005, Elizabeth was a surrogate for Jackson Courtney. I missed that whole time, I think.
I don't remember that either because they didn't.
I'm assuming that it ended in a miscarriage from the information that was listed, but there was like a custody fight going on because that's when Jax and Courtney broke up because of Nicholas hooking up with Courtney.
I thought that Courtney was pregnant though. Did Courtney have a miscarriage too? Or is that when she got pregnant with Spencer?
Spencer. Courtney had Spencer. So why did she need a surrogate before that? That's why I'm confused.
Maybe they didn't think that she could get pregnant.
I don't know. I don't remember. Like I remember her being pregnant with Spencer and it being like, oh my goodness. But I didn't remember it being like a health scare like she couldn't have gotten pregnant before.
Wasn't she with Jason?
Mm-hmm.
Did she get pregnant with Jason?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
We're going to have to look into that.
We are. But following Elizabeth, because she's
sorry.
part of the Hardy line, even though her last name's Weber. Yeah, she was a surrogate for Jackson Courtney. Right. Oh, 2016 is when Hayden arrived, because that is when it was brought up that Jeff had an affair with Naomi Dreyfus. And Jeff, as we said earlier, is Elizabeth and Sarah's dad, and so that's why they are half siblings. I don't like that they made Hayden leave, and she's pregnant, and she's pregnant. So why is she not coming back with that baby?
Right. I mean, and she wrote that note to Finn recently, too.
Yes.
To meet her.
Right. And then...
And Anna understood. She was like, I totally would have gone.
Yes. I thought that was going to be them bringing them back. Yeah. I know I'm getting a little off track here, but in my mind, these are where the storylines should have gone. Why are we not there yet?
Yes.
And then as far as it explains, Jeff is still in Asia with his wife, though maybe he could pop back with Hayden if Hayden comes back to see his grandchild. I don't know.
Maybe.
And it does mention that Audrey just babysits the boys or whatever. She's not really a big part of anything. So
Hayden was conceived during an affair, and I think I forgot to mention that Stephen Lars was also, because he was still married to Monica when he slept with Heather. So that was an affair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Elizabeth is just following in the footsteps of her family with all these different people, because we know she had Cameron in 2004 with Emily's boyfriend Xander.
Yes.
She had Jake with Jason in 2007.
Yes.
And then she had Aiden in 2010 that ended up being Lucky's that we thought maybe.
That we thought could have been Nicholas's, though.
Right.
The fact that there's a question there.
Yes. She's got that brother thing going on.
Wow.
But yeah, that's pretty much the only
Well, Monica did that, though, too, because she was married to Jeff and she was sleeping with Rick.
Right.
But Monica's not blood related to Elizabeth, so it's not like that's genetics.
No.
Just happens to be her dad's former wife before her mom.
My second cousin's sister's brother's neighbor.
Well, because we were trying to figure out how Laura and Elizabeth are related, but it's through like a weird branch off.
Cousins, it's through
Because her dad's. We will get into the. We already said.
Will. Yes, it gets very confusing because when you hear Weber, you want to understand why Lucky and Elizabeth were allowed to be together when Elizabeth and Laura's last names were both Weber. But it is okay. Yes. They didn't do anything shady there.
I think that we said that's what we're going to do next week is we're going to do the full Weber line.
That'll explain a little bit more.
A little bit more, and then I'm sure we're going to wind up. I'm just assuming from that we're going to talk about the Spencers because that kind of
they have
go
to
hand in hand, and then probably the Cassadines, right? I mean, that would just kind of be like a general, and then we could just maybe do like a mishmash of. We'll just see how it goes because some of these I think that we're not going to find a lot about, and then I had no idea about all this Steve and Audrey stuff.
Yes, I was disappointed that Steve and Audrey started out with such a sordid affair for all of your information, but coming into the 90s and 2000s, it's really Elizabeth carrying this whole family. There's not much more to talk about.
Sarah back. Is Sarah married? Does Sarah have kids?
It does not list children anywhere. The only grandchildren that it lists Jeff having are Elizabeth's 3 children.
Maybe Sarah could be with Lucky because she was with Lucky first.
She was with Lucky first. We just really need Lucky back.
Jonathan Jackson, please.
It doesn't matter who they put you with. Just please come back.
Jonathan Jackson. Jonathan Jackson Lucky needs to come back.
Right.
None of this other. No.
I don't even.
No. Let's not ever do that again.
I don't even accept those.
So is there any?
There's not anything else. I feel like
who's the next? So is Elizabeth it then?
Elizabeth's her sons, but they're not. Elizabeth's the end of it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, really, it does. That's like what I was saying. Except for all of Elizabeth's sordid affairs through the 90s and 2000s, there's no other relative. They need to bring Sarah back, and they need to bring Hayden in. Hayden was a perfect, branch off there.
Yeah.
And she didn't stay around for very long.
No. And Stephen Lars could always make a return.
Right. Maybe he'll get out of jail and come back.
Maybe he'll have children,
You think he had children in jail?
Listen.
Where are you going with this? I don't think so.
That's how Ted Bundy fathered a child while he was in prison.
Hopefully Stephen Lars is a little more sane than his mother and isn't going to do things like that.
He should be out by now.
I mean, I would think
it's been some time.
It was 2013.
We don't even talk about what's his name? Tom Hardy anymore. Like he's never mentioned ever. Do we just forget about people sometimes?
I guess so.
I think we do.
He went to Africa in 96 and he's never returned since.
Nothing. Crazy. One thing I did forget to mention because I think it's kind of a big thing because we had talked privately about how many actors got their start on General Hospital. Yes. And do you know who Jeff Weber was played by?
No.
Richard Dean Anderson. MacGyver.
Oh my gosh. All right.
So we're gonna have to do a whole history episode on actors that got their start on
Who
General
started at
Hospital.
General Hospital? Oh.
Because there are a lot. And maybe it wasn't their first gig, but I mean, it was definitely like they're launching like John Stamos, Demi Moore, Richard Dean Anderson,
Ricky Martin.
Well, he was a Menudo first. But he's exactly why I just said maybe it wasn't the first thing they did, but it was like they were launching.
That brought him.
Right. That brought him full.
Yes.
Into, well, and not for nothing, Menudo's not exactly American culture. It's.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's just really, Jonathan Jackson.
Mm.
What was your favorite thing that you learned?
I like the connection that we made about how Audrey is like Elizabeth, or Elizabeth is like Audrey, that she was one of the first female characters that obviously had a strong lead because she was bouncing around between different relationships.
Yeah.
Like, I knew that they had a sordid past, but I still pictured her as just like the good little nurse that was like kind of in the background.
We know Audrey as the
grandmother.
Prim and proper grandmother, and not for nothing, her character and demeanor
explains why she's so accepting of Elizabeth, though. I mean, she's always been there for Elizabeth when she was going through all her different stages and men, and
she just seems exceptionally conservative. You know, like that's the impression I've always gotten was. Nope, she and Steve were married and forever in love, you know? And then I'm like, no, Steve forever loved you.
You had to
but
marry
you did not.
Out of gratitude.
Well, no. She married her son's doctor out of gratitude, and she got engaged to a patient.
Combining stories, I'm sorry.
Come on. And I don't know. So
what was your favorite part?
I think it was really just finding out that Steve only married Audrey, and Audrey was all over the place, marrying everyone that she thought was nice.
Yes.
I mean, I thought that was such an odd statement to make. Out of gratitude, she married him. Like we said, I practice gratitude.
Right. I appreciate a lot of things that people do, but I don't end up hooking up with them.
No. So, and then I guess, just really realizing that for as prevalent and as historical as the Hardys are, they're kind of weaning out.
Yeah. Elizabeth is really all that's left.
These boys need to get cracking in about 10 years.
Yeah. Cam's, 14, 15?
So we realized that, Cam's actually appropriately aged.
Yes.
Which means that they kept him.
We
joked about this a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Because he had the love triangle
with he was
Spencer, Emma, and Spencer and Emma and Cameron had the love triangle. But that means they were halted him.
Yeah.
Because he's 14. So now they've aged him up 2 years, which is pretty much nothing compared to what we thought they had aged him up.
Yes.
So I don't know.
Yeah, that makes me happy that they're keeping them the appropriate age.
They seem,
we said Aiden was born in 2010. That puts him at 9.
Yeah. Jake, 12.
Charlotte still seems so much older than him, though.
She does, but is that because of the type of upbringing she's had?
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever met a 5-year-old that speaks proper English and speaks better than a teenager, and it's inspiring. You look at them and you just think, oh my goodness, how are you talking that way? And
then you find out that they're in boarding school 9 months of the year.
Right. So, but yeah.
No, it was interesting. I will be more interested as we get into the Weber line and see how they all kind of pull together.
Yeah.
I feel like we hit a lot of dead ends because we didn't want to jump into that side or we'd have been here for 6 hours. But
yes,
there's more information.
And there might be a little bit of repeat just because.
Right.
Well, so we didn't go too far into Jeff's. I mean, we talked about Jeff parenting Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth
Sarah,
and Sarah. But we didn't, and Stephen Lars, briefly, we didn't talk a ton about it. So, we didn't talk about Rick. We didn't talk about Terry, who's their sister.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that there's still a lot that we could discover. So, I guess that's it for our little history lesson about the Hardy family, the first family of General Hospital. And join us on Monday as we do a recap of this week's shows.
Have a good weekend.
And we'll meet you at the pier. Bye.
Bye.